talk about now is agreement writing. Now, agreement writing is the last step of the mediation process, and usually it ends up being the most exciting part for most new mediators. And I got to tell you, out of all of the advanced trainings, out of all the skill enhancement seminars I've done, the #1 skill that gets asked for in terms of more training is agreement writing. And I think the reason is there's a misperception about agreement writing. Most people think, and if you're just new in the mediation field or you're looking at it as an outsider, you're thinking, okay, you got two parties, they start in conflict. They're angry at each other, they're going at each other, they're threatening court back and forth, we're doing some venting, and because of your mediation skills, because of your ability to use this process effectively, lo and behold, they agree. And it's this euphoric moment, yes! Now all I got to do is write it down on paper and we're done. That's the misperception. In the agreement writing stage, the agreement writing is not the climax of the mediation process. If you think of it in terms of a novel or a movie, the climax of the mediation process is the reconvening together. Because it's that moment when you get back together after caucus, right? People are coming back. You know what the options are that are going to be offered on the table. You maybe even have some sense of how they're going to respond. But what will they say? Well, I'll give you $250. Okay. Yay! That's the climax, the decision of what's going to happen when the offers are exchanged. The agreement writing is the anti-climax. So what we often think of as the most exciting part, get it on paper, let's get out of here, is really drudgery. It's a lot of hard work. So the misperception going in is we're almost done, when really you're not. There's an awful lot of work that needs to be done, a lot of things that need to be paying attention to, and if you don't go into agreement writing that way, you end up making some critical mistakes that can be very costly to an agency, but more importantly to a program. And that's what we want to try to stay away from. So I wanted to try to shift your thinking here a little bit about what agreement writing is going to be like. And after this presentation, I think you'll have a better understanding of it's just hard work. Still, party's opening statement was hard. Caucus was hard. Agreement writing is hard as well. So we're not nearing the end. It's the anti-climax. And how do we ride this thing and still get the job done so that the parties leave effectively? Well, agreement writing is empowerment attained. Remember when we talked about the definition, and for those of you who have picked this presentation up first because you wanted that skill enhancement with agreement writing, so you went straight to here, we're going to review a little bit in terms of what mediation is and the collaborative model that we've been using throughout this training. Mediation is the process that empowers people to make an informed decision in their own best interest. So at the end of this process, empowerment attained. And if you remember the steps of the process, we'll just review that for a moment. Mediator's opening statement, MOS. Party's opening statement, POS. Joint discussion, caucus with both parties, reconvening together where that, will they settle? Will they say yes? And then agreement writing, the anti-climax. So let's jump in and see how we're going to do this. The evidence of empowerment attained resides in the document that you are about to write. As soon as someone, and we've addressed this in reconvening together, as soon as they say, yeah, I'll accept that offer for $200, now it's time to put something in writing. So the document, this written form, is evidence of the empowerment. They've made a decision. They've made an informed decision if you've done your job appropriately, and they've been empowered to make that decision. Even if it's a no agreement, you pull out the no agreement form, that's a decision. The process has empowered them to decide, I would much rather go to court. I would much rather go to the EEO process. I would much rather, I think I can get more there. I think it'll be better. My best interest will be served not settling here. So just because you got a no agreement doesn't mean you failed. Just because you got a no agreement doesn't mean the mediation process did not work. You've empowered two people to make an informed decision, even if it's no agreement. So the document of a no agreement form, or a document, 1, 2, 12, 14 pages, whatever it is, of a series of agreements, is still evidence of empowerment. That empowerment took place, they made informed decisions. So what we're going to look at in terms of agreement writing as a process is the document, their role in agreement writing, and your role in agreement writing. So let's jump in with document. It's evidence of mutual exchange. Someone offers one thing, the other person accepts, they offer something, and then that person accepts. Well, I'll agree to reduce the suspension. Okay, I agree to take that nasty poster that I put up all over the company off that has a mustache and, blacked out teeth of your photograph, right? I'll take your telephone number off the bathroom wall. Whatever the exchange is back and forth, there's been a mutual exchange, and this document is evidence of that. It also is evidence that the parties' issues have been addressed. Everything has been addressed, and that's part of your role and your responsibility. You found out what they wanted to talk about. You've explored the needs in caucus. You know what needs to be addressed. Now, from parties' opening statement through caucus, there may be issues that fall off the table. But by the time you're into reconvening and you're in agreement writing, you know what it is they want to cover and talk about. It's your responsibility to make sure that no one gets too excited, I'm going to get a $200 check, and forget to talk about the parking spot that they wanted to make sure they address. Your responsibility is to make sure that gets on the table. All of the parties' issues are addressed, which means, and we've done this before, but just as a reminder, if they want to talk about relationship issues, we talk about relationship issues. Yeah, well, that doesn't have anything to do with an EEO case. If they want to talk about relationship issues, we talk about relationship issues. If they don't want to talk about relationship issues, we don't talk about relationship issues. Yeah, but wouldn't that help things settle so that they don't come back again? Yeah, it probably would. But if they don't want to talk about it, the issues that they see as important, we're going to address here today. All of them. We're going to make sure they get covered. And the document is evidence of an informed decision. If they're going to make a mutual exchange, and they're going to say, yes, I'll accept that, and I'll do this for you, and you do this for me, their needs are being met, that document is evidence of informed decision-making process. Empowerment attained, issues addressed, mutual exchange, okay, all that is there with this document. So it's evidence of those. So let's talk about then their decision. They come up with an informed decision, and it is their decision. Whatever their decision is okay, as long as it's not illegal. If you know for a fact that it's illegal, then there's other things you need to be doing in terms of doing some reality testing, getting some more information at the table. Worst case scenario, you end the process because we're not going to be a party to an agreement of an illegal exchange. Well, if you drop that EEO, I'll give you that marijuana shipment that I'm getting in next week for half price. No, we're not going to do this here at this table. So it's their decision. Therefore, they have the right to make the wrong decision. Now, wrong in parentheses. Will parties make a decision that I would never make? Yeah, probably. Will parties make decisions that seem stupid or maybe not to their benefit, maybe to their best interest, but from me looking at it from an outsider, it's not really a benefit? Yes, they can. Do I see this as a mistake for them to settle here? I might see it that way, but it's their decision. So let's see if we can come up with an example. If a party, I got one. I did a case one time, it was a money owed situation, and the woman in caucus said she wanted $400. Now, I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but for illustrations, it was $400. She's wanting $400, she won't settle for anything less. In caucus with the other side of the table, he's not willing to go over $200. That's as far as he's going to go. If she doesn't like it, tough, we're out of here. So I know we're going to be exchanging numbers here. He tells me in caucus he doesn't want me to share the $200 number. He wants to do the negotiation because he's going to start lower. That makes sense. Everybody does that. So we get back together in reconvening, and he goes, I'll give you $100. She says, okay. And I'm trying to figure out what happened, right? She wants $400 last time I talked. She didn't want anything less. Not only that, I know she can get twice that amount if she'll just shut up for a moment. If she'd have played just a little bit of negotiation here, no, I don't want. He's okay, I'll go to 2. She could have got $200. Did she make the wrong decision? I don't know. I don't know what she's thinking about. I don't know what's best for her in a big picture. In this room, I know she could get more money. Is that important to her? Maybe, maybe not. I certainly can't pull her aside and say, well, let's caucus for a moment. Why didn't you try harder? You said 400. What happened? Because now who's going to be mad at me? The guy who's getting away with 100, half price. I can't intervene in that what looks like might be a wrong decision. It's her decision, and there's nothing illegal about it. So I let it happen. That can be tough sometimes. Someone you feel like they got a slam dunk case and they could take it all the way and get anything they want. But what they finally ask for is a closer parking spot to the building. Are you out of your mind? No. They're making a decision about their future and what they want. That may have been all they wanted all along, but they felt like they had to do all this to get it. It's their decision. Okay? So they have the right to make the wrong decision, and I will support that as long as I'm sure they're clear that that's what they want. Let's talk about their role then in the writing of this document. In terms of their role, their primary responsibility is the wording. Now, I've seen mediators say, a party goes, all right, I'll give you $200. The guy says, okay. The mediator pulls out the form and writes, Bob agrees to give Joe $200. You've made a mistake. You may have gotten what you thought was the agreement on paper, but you wrote it. You're not sure exactly if that's their words. So the first thing you want to do is, it sounds like there's something you both agree upon here. It sounds like an exchange of money, the $200 amount. Is that right? Yes, there is. Let me see if I can get that on paper. Bob agrees. Bob, how do you want this worded? You see, because the negotiations continue. And from here on out, the negotiations get incredibly specific. And you can have a lengthy negotiation over the difference between the and a, over the difference between whether a but should be in there or an and should be in there, because it can change the meaning of the sentence and the document. So you don't want to start assuming, oh, I heard him say it, so Bob agrees to give. No, Bob, how do you want that worded? Bob agrees, I agree to give Joe, okay, Bob agrees to give Joe $200. Joe, does that sound good to you? You want to keep them responsible for the document. And you do that by continually asking them, how do you want that worded? Is that wording good for you, Bob? Joe. Joe gets a chance to think through it and say, well, yes, I think that'll help. No, I don't. He can add something to it, can subtract something to it. He can be clearer in terms of how he wants this worded. And we want him to be responsible for this document, so that's the way you do it. You keep coming back, you keep asking, how do you want this worded? And therefore their negotiations continue. Once you get the sentence written out, and you have a series of sentences, you're asking them, does that sound okay? There's mutual satisfaction going on. And you want to, their role is to make sure that they're both satisfied, and you'll check with both of them. You'll check along the way as you're asking, is this what you want? Does this come out the way you want? Does it sound the way you want it to sound? Yes, no, mutual satisfaction. And their responsibility is a willingness to abide. In other words, whatever this document says, they're going to be willing, and you want to check and make sure that their responsibility, yes, I'm willing to abide by what's written here. Okay? That is their responsibility, and you're going to be checking this off each time. Now, primarily with the willingness to abide, you're going to do near the end. Is this your agreement? Is this the way you want it worded? Does this sound okay to you? Yes, it does. All right, then I'm going to ask you to sign it, and in signing, indicate your willingness to abide by it. We'll go over that a little bit more when we get to the signing process and how to make those details fall together and come together. So for the reminder then, it's their agreement, okay? And we're going to measure that with their wording. We're going to find out, is that the way you want it worded? Is that how you wanted it to sound? We're going to check, it's their negotiations, how do you want that worded? And mutual satisfaction, their satisfaction and their willingness to abide. So I'm going to have little ways as I'm working the writing process of this to measure and reinforce that it is their agreement, their responsibility in all of these areas, okay? So now let's look at your role. There are two areas we're going to look at in terms of the mediator's role. The first one we're going to deal with is clarity. You're responsible for the clarity of the document. Now, what kind of terms are you going to use? Especially in agencies, we get a lot of acronyms, you get a lot of jargon. Your responsibility is to clarify those things. Somebody spits out an acronym, you want to make sure it's clear. Well, what does that stand for? What does that mean? Maybe even write it out once in the document with, in parentheses, the acronym, and then through the rest of the document you can begin to use that representation, the series of symbols. Jargon's a little bit harder. You want to make sure they may understand, and that's the goal, that they understand what the word is. But you might want to clarify it a little bit in the document as well. What does this mean? What does this refer to? We were doing a mediation training for the Forestry Service, and the term rig had a very specific meaning in that agency, in that community. Rig can mean a number of things for me in terms of an oil rig or a crane or something, but for them it meant one specific thing. So you want to pay attention when parties are using language, specific jargon for their agency. Clarity, what does it mean? Make sure that everyone's on the same page. Spell out numbers. If you have $200, Bob's going to pay Joe $200. I'm going to write $200, 200.00 with a dollar sign. But in parentheses, I'm going to write $200. Or I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to write in the document $200 and in parentheses put the numbers. What we don't want to have happen is mysteriously digits appear in numbers. For instance, $200 in a handwritten document might easily turn into $1,200 if someone could slip a 1 between the dollar sign and a 2. We solve that problem by writing it out as well, spelling it all out in parentheses. So not that anybody's necessarily going to do anything wrong with an agreement document that they have, but we're going to make sure and keep the document clear at all times. That's your responsibility as the mediator. Also, we're going to begin to number pages. So at the end of the document, when you're finished, how many pages do you have? And at the bottom, 1 of 4, 2 of 4, 3 of 4, 1 of 1, however it works out, you're going to make sure that all those numbered pages get clear. Now, what if? Let's say you've got a document 3 pages long, there's 12 items of agreement, and item number 12 ends up at the top of the 3rd page, the very last page, and you've got this much white space between the 12th item and the bottom of the page where the signatures are. We need to do something about that white space because, again, we don't want mysteriously a 13th agreement to show up or end up in the document. There's a couple of ways to deal with this. I've seen mediators write item 13, period. There are no items following this point in this agreement. There are only 12 items of agreement in this document. Some way to indicate that this is over. It's the end. Nothing follows in this white space. Another way is the Zorro, where at just where 12 is, you write a big Z across the page so that that white space gets taken up, so nobody can write anything in. So you want to deal effectively with those lack of clarities in terms of somebody adding something to a document. So the end of agreement's dealt with. What about mistakes, strikeouts? One of the things you don't want to do is scribble it all out. You know, oh, I made a mistake. Whoops, aren't I embarrassed? And start crossing things out so no one can read it. That only breeds suspicion. You also don't want to get the white out and, you know, make it all nice and neat. A single line strikeout with a mistake, right through the word. Everybody can see it was a mistake. They could either even see the mistake you made. Maybe it's spelling, maybe it's the wrong word. Maybe we've changed a the to an a, who knows. But with that single strikeout, remove suspicion, and then all of the parties, all of the signing parties, initial around the strikeout. So Bob puts his initials, Joe puts his initials, I put my initials, to indicate that we all know that that was a mistake and we all agreed on its change. okay? I am adding to clarity, and those are all my responsibilities. As these two parties are negotiating, as these two parties are working on mutual satisfaction, I'm paying attention to language, mistakes, errors, clarity in the document. You see how this is a lot to be taken into consideration. This is not the euphoric, yay, we're at the end, you sign the agreement, we can go home. There's a great deal of work and effort and tedium going into the agreement writing process, and you need to be on your toes doing this, all right? It's anticlimactic. So we've dealt with clarity. The next part you're responsible for is loopholes. And there are several places loopholes can come up. Timelines, contingencies, and in language. The number one mistake, and I would say probably the biggest mistake I hear about from agencies where a mediator has made a mistake in the agreement writing process, has to do with not closing the loophole in a timeline. So Bob agrees to consider or to evaluate Joe for the next promotion. And there's no timeline identified. How long will Joe be considered for a promotion? For the rest of Joe's life? I actually know of an agency where the mediator made this mistake, and to this day, the employee is still insisting on being considered for every next promotion. The supervisor that came to the agreement isn't even at the agency anymore. But because of the wording, the loophole wasn't closed, this agency is stuck with this bad agreement. So a bad agreement gets defined not in terms of the decisions that were made. Remember, it's their agreement. A bad agreement is when the mediator fails to do his or her responsibility and deal with clarity or deal with the loopholes. You need to make sure that those timelines are closed. So you have to ask all of those appropriate questions. And we'll get to those questions in just a minute. So you want to be able to close those each time. Agencies, when we do advanced trainings and they show us agreements that have caused their agency trouble, it has to do with timelines. They're either not addressed, or they're not closed, or they're not dealt with effectively. Pay close attention to timelines. Contingencies, the what-ifs. Contingency agreements are fine. We do it all the time. There may be something going on here that requires somebody else's permission, and there's an if. Yeah, Bob, I'll give you that $200, but I got to clear it with my supervisor. Okay, that's a contingency agreement. It can be written down, but Joe needs to know that there's a possibility here that he ain't ever going to get $200. Does he understand that? Also has to do with language. Probably the classic that we use all the time is the word consider. I had a party in a mediation. The management wanted to offer the language, yeah, we'll consider you for the next promotion. And he chuckled and said, consider? I considered buying a Cadillac last week, but I didn't. I considered ordering Chinese food, but I didn't. See, he hit the nail on the head in terms of the ambiguity behind the word consider. So you want to be clear. Joe thinks, what does that mean? Bob will consider Joe for the next promotion. What does Joe think? He's got the next job. It's a shoo-in. What is Bob thinking? I'm just going to look at his resume and then shuffle it to the bottom of the stack. You need to have some clarity. Doesn't matter. You can still use the word consider, but you have the responsibility as mediator to make sure they both know what that means. So let me understand, Bob. You said that you're going to consider. Does that mean he's going to get top priority? He's going to get extra attention in his resume? Are you going to spend more time with his qualifications than anybody else? No, it just means that his resume will be included in all the others. So there's a possibility, Bob, that this means he wouldn't get the position if he's not qualified for it. That's exactly what it means. Joe, is that the way you understood that? No, I thought it meant I was going to get the job. See the danger you've just headed off because you asked the right questions. You want to do that with contingencies. If my supervisor approves it, Joe, you understand? Or Bob, does that mean that there's a possibility Joe won't get it? Yeah, that's what that means. Joe, did you understand that? That you may not ever see your money? As long as they're both clear, you can continue with the wording. Okay? But if you don't clarify it, they walk away with two different expectations. So, in terms of the questions and the things we want you to pay attention to, you want to work through a series of questions that deal with who, what, when, where, and how. In every element of the agreement, Bob agrees to give Joe $200. Who's doing what? Bob's going to do something. What's he going to do? He's going to give Joe $200. When is he going to give it to him? See, there's a timeline missing in there. So Joe comes back and says, Bob, I haven't got my $200. Don't worry, I'll give it to you. Yeah, I know you said you would, but when am I going to get it? He said, I'll give it to you as soon as I get it. See what happened? It's in the agreement. Bob is still honoring the agreement, but because the when question wasn't dealt with, where is it going to take place? Parking lot. Is it going to happen? Is he going to get it in the mail? Is he going to get it cashier's check? Things like that. Where is this going to take place? How? Cashier's check, cash. Not every question will be applicable to every sentence, but if you work through each of these questions and make an evaluation and a judgment, you'll be able to address the loopholes potentially there in the agreement. All right? So let's move on to signing. We've looked at the document, what it represents, their responsibilities in terms of their agreement and the wording process, your responsibilities in terms of clarity and loopholes. We've now got a document. It's ready to sign. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read it aloud to the parties. I've gone over each one individually. Bob, does that sound okay to you? Joe, does that sound okay to you? Is that the way you want it worded? But now it's a document as a whole. We're going to read through the whole thing. This can be done a couple of ways. I can read the document to them and just let them listen, or I can copy it and then read it to them. Either way, which is most comfortable for you. It has to do with learning styles, auditory, verbal. This way, if they have it in front of them and they look at it and you read it aloud and they get to follow along, you've addressed both. That's often the way I like to do it. But you can read it aloud, get their approval, and then go copy it, bring it back, have them look over it, and then begin to sign. Is this your agreement? Now, before we're going to go into the signing, I'm going to ask them, is this your agreement? Bob, is this your agreement? Joe, is this your agreement? Is this what you wanted it to look like? All right? Are you satisfied with this agreement? Yes, we are. Well, then I'm going to ask you to sign it here, and I'm going to point, indicating your willingness to abide with this agreement. They're going to sign it. We're going to sign all copies. If Joe, Bob, and myself are at the table, that's 2 copies. I keep the original for the program, ADR program file. Bob and Joe are both going to get a copy. So we have 3 copies circulating here. I sign 3 times. They sign 3 times also. Now, there are some agencies where the mediator doesn't sign. So if there's not a slot for the mediator to sign as a witness or as an indicator as who the mediator is, just skip that part, have them sign. But they've got to sign every copy. You also want to make sure that if there are any changes in this final document, and it's all initialed, that all of the initials are where they need to be in each strikeout, okay? So with the signing process, have them sign it. When they're finished, hand them their copy. You have your copy in your file. We're finished. So all that hard work, that tedium, getting the wording right, asking the right questions, getting it done, culminates in the signing process. They sign it, you stand up, thank you for being here today, maybe shake their hands, wish them good luck, and you leave. Get out as fast as you can. Don't stand around and pat each other. Isn't that great? Yeah, boy, you guys have really got a great future together. You've done a lot of hard work here today. No, get your stuff and go. You're done. Process is finished. Okay? One last question about signing. And we get this a lot in training. And occasionally, I've actually had one mediation where a party walked into the room during the opening statement I was given and asked, is the agreement going to be binding? Okay, it was kind of thrown off because I'm prepared to answer that question during the agreement writing stage. So, finagled and still got an answer to his question, moved right on then with the mediator's opening statement. But is the agreement binding? Yes? No? If a party asks, as they're about to sign, excuse me, before I put my name to this document and indicate my willingness to abide by it, is it binding? Yes or no? Well, it's a tricky question because if you answer yes, that's the wrong answer. If you answer no, that's the wrong answer. The reason is you can't answer the question about binding. In our culture, in our society, the person who determines whether a document, a contract, meets all of the elements, all of the requirements of a contract, the person who makes that determination is a judge. I'm not a judge. The mediator sitting in this chair as a mediator, even if they are a judge, as a mediator cannot answer the question because they're not a judge. Our legal society determines whether it's binding or not. So how do I address this question? Someone says, is this binding? Well, it can be. It could be. A judge may determine that it is binding, but we won't know until a judge looks at it. But I don't want you to sign this document unless you're willing for a judge to find it binding on you. We're back to that mutual satisfaction thing. I do not want them signing a document unless they're happy with it. Is this what you wanted? Did you hope to get something else better somewhere else? If you're not happy with this, don't sign it. I would much rather walk away with a no agreement than a bad agreement. And again, bad is we didn't close those loopholes, we didn't deal with the clarity. This is an issue of clarity. Now, you might want to press a little bit further because each time this question has been asked, the legal answer was not what they were looking for. They didn't want to know yes or no, a judge might not. What they wanted to know was, will Bob do what he says he's going to do? If Bob signs this agreement, can I be guaranteed that he'll have to do it? It's a security issue. There's some psychological insecurity going on at the table behind that question. That's a clarity issue, and you can deal with that at this table. That question you can answer. I'm curious why you're asking. I mean, judge decides it may be found binding. I don't want you signing it unless you're willing for it to be found binding. But what is it that you're concerned about? Well, I just want to make sure that I get my money. I make sure that Bob does, Bob's lied to me before. Oh. We can address the security issues. I did a money owed case one time. They walked in. I thought this was going to be the easiest case I ever did. The one party on the side says, no, the guy owes me $1,200. The other guy on the other side says, yep, you're right. I want you to pay me. Okay, I will. I'm excited. This looks like a one-point agreement. Oh, you get $1,200? Yes, I'll pay. The problem was this guy had owed him money for a long time, and over a period of time had whittled some of it down to $1,200. The problem was that this person had no confidence that he would ever see $1,200 from this person because he had welched on it before. That agreement turned into 3 full pages that addressed the security this man and the insecurity that this man was feeling. So it had all of these contingencies. If he doesn't pay the $1,200, $200 a month via cashier's check on the 15th of every month, then he has to pay $1,400. Are you willing to do that? Yes, I am. And if he doesn't pay the $1,400 by 6 months from now, then he owes me his house. Are you willing to do it? Yes, I'm willing to do it. If he doesn't give me his house within 2 years from now, it was all security issues. And we had to pad this agreement in order to make this party feel better. So that question about binding may have a need behind it you can explore and deal with here. The legal aspects, the answer is, I can't tell you. But don't sign it unless you're willing to have found binding on you, and then you'll be willing to live up with it. You want the parties to walk away believing, you want the parties walking away knowing that this is what they want. And if you've done the need assessment appropriately, you've gone through the caucus process, you've gotten the agreement in the language that they want, mutual satisfaction exists, they're going to walk out of this room, both of them, willing to live up to this because it's what they both want. That's the ideal. See, I don't have to walk around behind them going, have you written the check yet? Have you taken care of that? You know, the ADR coordinator doesn't have to be calling up every 2 weeks to make sure everybody's doing what they said they would. No, they're going to do it because it's what they want. So it's a self-enforcing agreement. That's the beauty of it. And I got to tell you, in all of the agencies that we do, and all of the years of experience, that's what happens. Parties keep their agreements because they're getting something they want, both sides of the table. It's the value of that collaborative model. Okay? So, is it binding? Watch that one. Trouble spots you want to pay attention to in agreement writing. Timelines, we've talked about those. Close those loops. When is it going to be taken care of? How long is it going to take? Money issues. Make sure you clarify the hows and the whens in there. Apologies. Apologies can be tricky. Somebody says, well, I want an apology. I want him to apologize for what he said to me. I want him to apologize for giving me that unfair suspension. Apologies can be tricky in the agreement writing process. Somebody asks for an apology, you want to ask, do you want that in the agreement? Now there's two parts to that question. Do you want the apology written down? I apologize for, or do you want the fact apology was done here written in? What I've often seen is that parties will say no to the apology thing being written down. That's more often than not what happens. Apologies will take place, but it doesn't end up in the document. Sometimes it will come out, Bob apologized to Joe, and that's all that's written. Nothing specific, no content, because they usually both agree to that. But oftentimes the apology becomes tricky because of the insinuation of guilt. You can apologize many, many, many different ways. Just because Bob apologizes to Joe doesn't mean that Bob's admitting he did anything wrong. Sometimes an apology can go simply, well, I apologize for the difficulty of the situation. I'm sorry you went through this. Does that mean Bob did anything wrong? Does that mean Bob's admitting something? No. Will Joe be satisfied with that? I don't know. We're going to have to ask Joe. He may want to make sure that Bob admits something wrong. That may still happen, but it doesn't necessarily end up in an agreement. So apologies. I had an agency one time that refused to do anything at the table because they felt like it would insinuate guilt. If I write anything down in an agreement, if I agree to anything, then it means I did something wrong. The boilerplate language in the agreement for that agency specifically said if the agency reaches an agreement, it is not to be implied that there was any guilt involved. So once I realized what the difficulty was and the sensitivity, we caucused. I slid the blank copy of the agreement over. He read it, saw the boilerplate, and said, fine, we can go forward. I'll write it down, because it meant it didn't imply guilt. So you can handle agreements with apologies, written, not written, public, not public. You're responsible for asking all those questions. Oftentimes what I see with new mediators, someone says, I want an apology, and they drop their pen, and you see this deflated look on their face. Oh my gosh, this mediation's over. Because apologies can often be difficult to handle. Doesn't have to be. Ask a few questions. Written, private, in the agreement, not in the agreement. How do you want this to sound? I've actually worked with a party one time in caucus on how to word the apology. No, I'm not going to say that. Yes, I'll say this. We'll try this. We'll try that. Again, not wanting to sound as though he'd done anything wrong, but willing to apologize in order to move forward, get this behind him so they could go on. So apologies can be trouble spots. Contingencies, we've talked about those in terms of the ifs. Make sure both parties understand the potential, what that if means. Loopholes, timelines and language, things like that, and whys. We don't put whys in agreements. So we took the who, is going to do what, when are they going to do it, where are they going to do it, how are they going to do it. We never answered the question why, not in a document, because why does insinuate blame and guilt. Bob agrees to pay Joe $200 because he messed up in the hallway with that oral admonishment. Bob's not going to sign that. The agency's not going to sign that. Bob would be in trouble if he signed it from the agency. But if you eliminate the because, any language that starts with for or because, you're running into those whys. I've had parties ask for that. No, I want them to say it. And I have to do just a little bit of an introduction about the process, that one of the things we stay away from in agreement writing is the why, because we don't want to associate blame. And Bob's going to jump all over Joe and say, yeah, tell you what, I can't sign it, Joe, if you forced me to say I did something wrong. So then Joe's got to weigh out what's in his best interest there. So we stay away from whys. All right, we've gone over the writing process. Let's look at some examples. Let's do some exercises and ask the questions who, what, when, where, how. Okay? We have 10 of these. Let's start with number 1. Marty agrees to change the suspension to 2 days without pay. Who's doing what? Marty. What's he doing? He's changing the suspension. When is he going to change the suspension? We don't know. Will he ever change the suspension? Is he going to do it before the next pay period? Is there pay loss involved here? I mean, who has to know? How's the process going to, how's he going to address this? Does he have to go to payroll? Does he have to go to personnel? Is it going to be in writing? How is this going to be accomplished? Doesn't necessarily mean you've got to write a volume or a novelette and for each one, but you want to ask the questions so that the clarity is on the table. I might like to add a timeline here. When? He's going to do it. Has the suspension already taken place? Is there going to be a replacement of days somewhere? These are questions we have to ask. I might like to know when. Might want to add it in there. Let's put a timeline to that, Bob. By when is this going to be done? It'll be done in the next 6 weeks. Is that okay with you? Yes, that's fine with me, whoever the other party is. Yes, that's fine with me. Okay, 6 weeks. And we put a timeline in there, period. Adds to the clarity. Let's look at another one. 2. Marty agrees to accept a written list of suggestions from Sherelle. Okay, we've got the name for the other party now, Sherelle. He promises a good faith review of that written list. So who's doing what? Well, we got 2 people here. Marty's doing something. Sherelle's going to do something. Marty's going to accept a written list. Sherelle's going to provide a written list. So we've got a who and what they're going to do. When are they going to do it? How long does Sherelle have to put this together? When is Marty expecting it? Is Marty expecting it in the next 2 weeks, but Sherelle thinks she's got a month? How many employees does she have to poll? Or how long does it take her to get this list going? Don't know. I need to have some closure here in terms of timeline. Where is this going to take place? Well, I'm not sure that's necessarily to fill out. May not be appropriate here. Maybe where is in his office, at the company. And how is it going to take place? He's offered a good faith effort. She's going to provide it. Good faith. What does good faith mean? Is she expecting more out of a good faith effort than he's willing to provide? You have to ask the question. It may be perfectly clear to both of them, but you need to make sure. Don't assume. Let's look at the third one. Both parties agree that no specific action is promised concerning the written list except a good faith review. Now see what we've done. This component gets added to the agreement in conjunction with number 2 to clarify some of the expectations. So we've asked the questions and we've added now something to the agreement in order to bring clarity to it. Notice it's number 3 and notice it starts with both parties. We've combined, they both agree on this because we've asked the question and they said, no, I just expect a good faith effort. That he'll look at it and be serious about it. Okay, that's fine. We've written it in there for clarity. Both parties agree. Sherelle agrees not to talk bad about the company. Who's going to do what? Sherelle's not going to talk bad. Bad. What does that mean? What does bad mean? Man, that's not very clear. Does bad mean she's not ever going to complain about her job? Does bad mean she's not going to badmouth the supervisor or his boss? We might want some clarity on that term, bad. Where is she going to do this? Can she never say anything bad about the company? Can she now not go home and complain to the dog? Yeah, my job is terrible. My supervisor is an idiot. Has she agreed to that? Until we've clarified it, this is a wide open statement, and Sherelle may not even understand what she's possibly signing unless you ask those questions. Where are we going to take this to? Okay, so get some clarity on the word bad. Okay, find out, when. Is it ever? and where. Can she not do it at home? Can she not do it at the office? Number 5 is an attempt to clarify it. Let's word it a different way. Sherelle agrees not to talk to the press. Now, there's a when or a where. Okay? She can talk bad, but she's not going to talk bad about coming to the press, and will attempt to keep her comments in-house. Okay? So we're getting some clarity, a little bit more specificity, and that offers a stronger agreement, much better than the other one about not talk bad about the company. Let's look at number 6. Sherelle agrees not to file an EEO complaint or grievance. This line, or a line similar to this, is in every agreement we've ever done with an agency that has an EEO complaint. Actually, that's one of the things the agency will demand of the party. I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to give a good faith effort to this list. I'm willing to consider you for the next promotion. But, Sherelle, Joe, whoever it is, I need you to drop your complaint. But let's look at this with our questions. Who's going to do what? Sherelle agrees not to file an EEO complaint. When? And what case are we talking about? Does this mean if we're not careful, she will never file an EEO complaint? Ever? I mean, if she basically says she will not file an EEO complaint or grievance, that's what this says. Is that what she thinks she's doing? You have to ask those questions. The wording is critically important in terms of clarity and loopholes. Maybe it would be better, she agrees not to file an EEO complaint on case number, whatever the case number is, to file an EEO complaint on, for the case for which this mediation was scheduled. Some way to identify and limit her agreement not to sign or file an EEO complaint or grievance. Okay? So those questions, it looks innocent enough. I mean, it sounds like, oh yeah, this is beautiful, this is perfect, and the agency may be perfectly fine with this, and Sherelle may even go for it. But they may have both missed the ambiguity that you saw because you asked the 5 questions. Number 7, Marty agrees to consider Sherelle for the next promotion. We've talked about this one, the consider thing. Marty's going to consider, what's he going to do? Consider Sherelle when the next promotion, okay, where? At this plant, any plant, every office? How long is this going to take place? How's he going to do it? Is it going to be just, look at just put her resume or application in the file? We need to cover this for clarity so they both understand. We've done consider already. Let's talk about this. Contingency. Marty's going to agree to give Sherelle flex time, but only if his supervisor approves it. What if his supervisor doesn't? Again, if Sherelle walks out of here thinking, slam dunk, I've got flex time, this is going to be great, really going to meet the needs of my family, this is fantastic. And then she finds out 2 weeks later, oops, my supervisor didn't approve it. You've now got a bad agreement, and you've got hurt feelings, and probably worst case scenario in terms of conflict in the workplace. It's very important you cover these questions. Let's look at 9. Marty agrees to pay Sherelle $450 because the suspension was unfair. That because in there creates a why. We don't answer why questions in agreement writing. It'd be much better if we just stopped at the because. Marty agrees to pay Sherelle $450, period. But then we've got the how. Is it going to be a cashier's check? Is he going to do it in monthly installments? I always have parties go, I want monthly installments, I want $20 a month, and I want it by the 15th of each month. Okay, 15th of each month sounds very clear. But when you say 15th, do you mean in your hand by the 15th of the month, or that the check coming in the mail is postmarked the 15th? Good questions to ask as long as both people agree and understand. I had one where we pressed this and they really got excited and it really pushed this hard, both parties, so they finally agreed that he was going to pay her cash at the ATM closest to this building, and even defined which ATM that was, and that she would agree to sign his receipts, his little form out of the ATM as a receipt. Covered all of the details. They were both happy. Number 10, Sherelle agrees to apologize for the remarks she made about the company. Remember, apology can be tricky. Is it going to be in public? Is it going to be private? Has it already taken place at this table? Is this enough for Marty? Is he satisfied with this? We want to ask all of these questions. When is she going to apologize? Maybe it's at the table. Maybe it's going to be at a public forum. Maybe she's agreed to that. You are the one responsible for asking these questions. So what a good mediator will do is, as he or she is writing, they'll be running mentally through the back of their mind, who's doing what, when are they doing it, where does that fit in here, and how is it going to be done? So that that agreement becomes very clear and all loopholes are closed. Summary then. Things that are important in terms of an agreement writing process and what you're trying to accomplish here. Agreement or no agreement, it doesn't matter. It demonstrates an informed decision has been made. They agree or they don't agree, you've empowered them, and the agreement writing process is the attainment of that empowerment by creating a document that demonstrates it, whether it's a no agreement form or an agreement form. And what they decide is up to them. Remember, you're neutral. You're not here to judge whether that's a good idea or that's a bad idea, or try to direct them in a direction you think would be best for them or the company. That's not your responsibility. It's their agreement, their decision. You're continually to add clarity to that by asking the questions who, what, when, where, and how. You cover those questions. You tie up the loose ends, clear up the ambiguities. You have a document here that demonstrates empowerment, parties making an informed decision in their best interest, both of their best interest, and you've accomplished, with an effective use of this process, a resolution to a conflict that was quicker, probably easier, and more productive with a collaborative model than going through a lengthy EEO process. And it is very satisfying. But remember, it's not over just because they agreed. You've got a lot of work ahead of you with the writing process, the clarity, asking those questions. Keep practicing it. It'll work for you.